So I was at Toronto Film Festival, and there were a lot of awesome movies that I want to talk about. Here's what I saw. One of the films I saw was called Aloners. This is the directorial debut from Korean director Hong Sung-eun, and this is essentially a character drama touching on the growing number of people who prefer to live solitary lives. Now, as it is a first feature, this film is fairly small scale and contained. It's short and sweet, but it's also very watchable. It's easy to care about the characters, and the film has a good sense of humor. There's a really funny dynamic between the main character and her trainee at work. The lead actor delivers a great performance, and everyone else is at the very least serviceable. It's well shot and well paced. There's some great reincorporation in this film that feels sentimental and purposeful. This film doesn't delve into its subject matter as deeply as it could, but also at the end of the day, it's not necessarily the type of movie where it feels as though it needs to. It is a nice, digestible film that I will likely see again, so check this one out sometime, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Petite Maman by Céline Sciamma. Now, I've seen all of this director's films except her masterpiece, apparently. And don't worry, I will get to it. I just gotta be in the right mood. I'm looking forward to it. I will watch it. But every other film I've seen from her has just been fine. Perhaps we could say they're not really for me. But I figured with this film only being 70 minutes long, it's a fairly low commitment. And although that was true, this film still feels like it should have been a half-hour-long short, or maybe even shorter. I was thoroughly enjoying the first half of this film. It looks great visually, and the tone feels very cute and sentimental. It felt genuine and realistic, and pretty appropriately tackled the concept of death through the eyes of a child. It was very cute and innocent without feeling super forced or manipulative or cheesy, and then all of that just kind of gets thrown out of the window in the second half of the film. As soon as the main girl is now acting with the other child and their characters are forced to communicate with each other and bounce off of each other, it gets very irritating and unrealistic and lame. For the first half of the film, it was a child character, and for the second half of the film, it's two children being told what to do by an adult behind the camera. They pull the whole, ooh, these children are so quiet and awkward, it's just a coincidence that they don't have to act properly. There is one scene in the film with these two children together that feels incredibly natural, and it's obvious that they just let the kids do what they wanted in that scene. As soon as they weren't trying to read memorized lines and act for the camera, it was totally fine. But the differences between this scene and every other scene where they're together sticks out like a sore thumb. I get it, apparently I'm the only person on the planet that gets annoyed by children in movies, so feel free to watch this movie because apparently nobody cares. But it was honestly preventing me from being sucked into the film, and the story was not that great. Near the end of the film, they play an incredibly unfitting song for some sort of montage kind of sequence, and it feels so weirdly out of place and unearned and just a bizarre choice overall. Despite all this, there were some very powerful and genuine moments in this film, mostly in the first half, but by the end of it, everything felt kind of pointless and forgettable. Yeah, somehow, despite its short runtime, it was not really worth watching for me overall. It's not a terrible film, I guess, I just will not be thinking of this ever again. So check it out if you want, maybe, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Another film I saw was Întregalde. I think that's how I pronounce it, I'm not sure. This is a Romanian film from the director of Tuesday After Christmas. This film is incredibly well shot, it looks super professional, it's very atmospheric, there's incredibly natural dialogue and performances, there's great chemistry between the characters, there's lots of long takes, it's very tense and foreboding, and I can't really talk too much about what this movie is because you kind of just have to experience it for yourself. I will say that in many ways it is a very frustrating movie. The characters in this film make very stupid decisions, however, it doesn't feel unrealistic. There's a lot of anxiety in this film, and most of the frustration comes from the situation and not the characters, although there definitely are points where I was frustrated at the characters. But it's just so well made that it's impossible for me to call this movie bad. The way that the environment is utilized in this film is absolutely incredible. The weather and specific setting is very much a character in this film. The amount of planning and coordination and perhaps just serendipitous luck that went into creating this film is just crazy. Now, with me being very frustrated with this film for much of the experience, I didn't think I was going to enjoy it this much, but by the end of it, it felt incredibly profound. It's a film where I was truly experiencing the emotions of the characters. So much of this film feels so genuine and filled with personality, and it is definitely worth it to get to the end. It is an incredibly well-directed film with so many fantastic choices. It never forced emotions through a manipulative soundtrack. It's just a super well-made film that is simultaneously frustrating and difficult to watch. So if you like experiencing anxiety and maybe even getting mad, then check this one out. This is one of my favorite films of the year so far, and I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7. I'll watch it again and we'll see if it goes even higher. Who knows? Another film I saw was the new Jane Campion film, The Power of the Dog. The film stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, and Cody Smith-McPhee. All of the performances in this film are at the very least solid. There's also a lot of character in the characters in this film, and that combined with the film's story made this very solid and watchable. There are some parts about the plot that feel strangely modernistic, but maybe that's just because of the tropes I'm used to for the time period. There are some parts of this film that felt a little cheesy, but for the most part, it does communicate emotion pretty effectively. As the film progressed, I got more invested in what I was watching. It's a really well-shot and professional-looking film, and the film's score was really great. The music is probably my favorite part of this movie. I am unsurprised to learn that it was Johnny Greenwood who composed the music for this film. Now, although the movie looks great for the most part, there are some parts and some shots that looked weirdly digital. I have no idea, maybe I'm crazy, it just looked weird to me, I don't know. This film didn't exactly blow me away or anything, but it was a thoroughly enjoyable film that I will be seeing again. So check this one out when it's released on Netflix on December 1st, and I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was a documentary called Comala. This is told through the perspective of the director, who spends the film trying to find out more about his estranged father, who is a deceased hitman. Conceptually, this is very interesting. It's obviously a very personal story for the director, who is coming to terms with his own family's history, and that personal nature does add a lot to the film. It's not a great movie, but it is still fairly impressive for a first feature. It's pretty well shot for a documentary. Some parts were funny and some parts were disturbing. I don't have a lot to say about it because it's not a super complicated or deep movie that I'll be returning to. However, it was still worth watching and fairly interesting. So if this looks good to you, then check it out, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was a French thriller called Inexorable, and I did not finish it. This is because although there was some good music and it was decently well shot, it was also very, very boring and predictable. The entire movie is the most cliched and tropey thing ever of all time. The main character is a writer who goes to a creepy mansion for inspiration, and he comes across a woman whose parents died in a car accident when she was just very little, etc., etc. And you could probably figure out the rest because I did. The movie was mostly just build up to shit that was obviously going to happen, but the build-up wasn't interesting. It didn't do anything new or special. About halfway through the movie, I just started skipping through it to confirm my predictions about where the plot would go and what would happen, and it was exactly what I guessed. It was painfully obvious and somehow had zero self-awareness about it. Again, there are some ways in which this movie is actually pretty well presented, but what is it in service of? The most generic, boring, nothing plot ever. Skip this one, it's really lame, and I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10. Another film I saw was Encounter, starring Riz Ahmed. This is a sci-fi-ish film from Amazon Studios, and it looks really great. There's clearly some production value, and it looks really professional. Riz Ahmed is honestly fantastic in this film and proves himself to be a really great character actor. Refreshingly, the child performances in this film are also competent. One of them's a little bit more talented than the other, but for the most part, they really work for the film. They're also not written terribly either. Conceptually, this film is really interesting, and there's a really solid setup. The characters and conflicts are well developed, and I really cared about their relationships. Now, unfortunately, this film's strengths don't stay consistent throughout. It gets more tropey and uninteresting as it goes on. There are more frequent goofy scenes with unsatisfying resolutions. However, this film is definitely not short of satisfying scenes either. By the end of the film, I really appreciated where it went. I'm glad that this story is something that they decided to tell in this way, and although unfortunately occasionally there are important scenes that are really lacking in their execution, this movie still manages to feel pretty unique. So yeah, check this one out when it gets released on December 10th, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. It's closer to a 7 than a 5. Another film I saw was Compartment No. 6. This is a film about two strangers who share a compartment on a train. This was easily one of my favorite films of the festival. The writing in this is really great. There's lots of character to each character in the film. The way they interact with each other with their chemistry and dynamics, it's all just an absolute joy to watch. Now this is mainly a drama, but there's plenty of humor as well. Much of this film gives off vibes of meaning and sentimentality. There's some really excellent blocking in this film as well. With the limited amount of space in each scene, they really made the most of it. The way that the movements of the actors and the camera coordinated with each other was noticeably skillful. The performances are incredibly natural, and you can tell that there's a lot of care and attention on how characters are acting physically. There's also some really clever editing choices. I love the characters in this film, and it was incredibly easy to get sucked into the narrative. Sure, there are a couple familiar narrative tropes here and there. Nevertheless, it is an incredibly engaging and super watchable film. So check this one out whenever you can, and I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than a 7. I might change it to a 9 the next time I watch it. Who knows? Another film I saw was Julia. There's actually another movie called Julia from 2008 starring Tilda Swinton, and it's very different. I would recommend it. This newest Julia is a documentary about Julia Child, the iconic TV celebrity chef that started it all. Now, I was aware of Julia Child without really knowing all that much about her, so I learned quite a lot through this documentary. It really delves into the context of the time period and the culture, and it thoroughly explores just how revolutionary and influential she was. It also talks about her involvement working with spies in World War II. Did not know that. This is a light and easy-to-watch documentary that is thoroughly interesting and informative. One might even call it digestible. Haha, bazinga. Anyway, this documentary was pretty great, so check it out whenever you can. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was The Rescue. This is the latest film from the Oscar-winning directors of Free Solo, and it tells the crazy, incredible story of the Thai soccer team that was trapped in a cave for over 2 weeks. Now, I thought Free Solo was pretty great overall, but the one thing holding it back from being fantastic was the music. They hired the most generic paint-by-numbers composer ever, whose previous works include World War Z and Amusement. And yeah, the music's technically there, it's just so bland and unspecial. Music is very important to me, and quite honestly, Free Solo deserved a lot better. Now, thankfully for this film, they did not keep the same composer as Free Solo, but at the same time, it's really not a gigantic improvement or anything. There's sections of the presentation that honestly feel more like a TV special than a feature film, and the music is a big part of that. Now, many of the scenes in this film are actually dramatized recreations of what took place, and for the most part, these scenes were surprisingly competent and well made. It didn't feel way too cheesy or overdramatic, although later on there are some CG graphics that feel a bit weird and inappropriate. The best part about this movie is honestly its subject matter. It's a great subject to be turned into a film, and it's impossible not to get emotional over parts of this story. Unlike most feature-length documentaries, this doesn't feel stretched out at all, and this is mostly because of how long the real event took place over and how many challenges they were presented with. It's a subject that lends itself very well to being a feature-length documentary. Now, the music isn't my biggest gripe, and overall it was serviceable for the film. The music in this movie is like the cinematography in the Tom Holland, John Watts Spider-Man films. It's there. My biggest issue is that I spent a lot of the movie waiting for them to talk about how Elon Musk accused one of the rescuers of being a pedophile for no reason, because he was mad that people didn't like his impractical boy tube he invented, or something. It's easily one of the funniest and most interesting parts about the story, and they just didn't include it. Maybe they were afraid of getting sued or upsetting Daddy Elon. Maybe he owns something where there's a conflict of interest. Maybe it was so they could keep a lower MPAA rating. Or maybe they just didn't want Elon to be a part of this story. All we can do is speculate, but man, I was kind of disappointed about that. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. You can just mention that it happened, you know? You're missing part of the story. It would increase the amount of entertainment in this entertainment entertainment product you've made. Still, this movie was really enjoyable overall. But word of advice for whenever you're watching it, just make sure you're within very short distance of the mute button on your remote as soon as the end credits start. Because holy Christ, it is the most cancerous song that could possibly exist in this documentary.
You've just gotta believe that anything's possible.
I'm pretty sure there was actually an end credits sequence that was taking place as this song was playing, but I had to shut it off immediately. And maybe I could have watched it on mute or something, but I just dipped so fast. It was a completely visceral, reflexive action. I was no longer in control. I had to get out because I was in hell. So yeah, skip the end credits, I guess. Regardless, this is a great story, and this film is definitely worth watching. And I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. Another film I saw was Dashcam. This is from the director of Host from 2020, which was also a very awful, terrible, bad movie. Since the festival was online, I didn't have to worry about being stuck in a theater when the movie was inevitably awful, so I decided to check this one out just to see what it was like. And yep, it was cringe. It's a found footage movie, except instead of it being over Zoom this time, it's like someone's Twitch stream, and there's supposed to be like an obnoxious IRL streaming Trump supporter. But once again, this director has an incredibly rudimentary understanding of internet culture, current events, people, and reality. Everything felt incredibly phony. The main character is really obviously just a liberal actor pretending to be a Trump supporter. Both the acting and casting are absolute failures in this sense. The way she acts, her general appearance and cadence do not give off anything close to a conservative vibe. So to make up for it, they just loudly explain what you're supposed to believe she is in the most obvious way possible. Oh, she's wearing a MAGA hat and she's complaining about lockdowns. She's wearing a shirt that has a no symbol over the word liberal. Like, don't get me wrong, there are certainly people like this that test Poe's law, but in this film, at no point does it ever feel like anything other than a bizarre caricature. It is so fucking embarrassingly one-note and pandering. Whoa, now she's talking about her All Lives Matter sign. Whoa, didn't see that one coming. I would genuinely love to see this type of character portrayed satirically in a film, but not even for a nanosecond can I come even remotely close to believing that it's the character on screen. It is so fucking lazy and irritating and obvious. It's one of the most out-of-touch movies ever. This is one of very, very few movies where I looked at it and thought, man, I could actually make this. Like, without needing any skill or preparation or budget, it's one of those, like, wow, I could just make this right now movies. The whole thing's shot on a GoPro, and it's just really embarrassing, and nothing special happens. I started skipping through it somewhere after the 20-minute mark because I could not handle it. Fuck that shit. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, to fool me can't get fooled again. 1 out of 10. Another film I tried watching was Lakewood, starring Naomi Watts. This is another film I checked out because I thought it would probably be funny bad. This is a movie about a white woman who lives the white woman's life, and while her son's at school, there's a school shooting, and she uses the power of her smartphone to solve all the mysteries for everybody over the course of the film. It's like Phone Booth, but not as exciting, and it's for Christian white moms. The soundtrack choices were very aggressively bad. There were 2 unbearably sappy songs in a row, and I thought, holy fuck, is this church camp? It's non-stop sappiness, and she just jogs around with her iPhone solving all of the mysteries. There was a really funny moment where she tripped and fell over nothing, and the music kind of spoiled it, like it was leading up to a fucking drop. That was pretty comical. After about 25 minutes, I decided that I'd had enough, and I skipped through the rest of it. It was bad. 2 out of 10. Another film I saw was a documentary called Listening to Kenny G. This is from director Penny Lane, who made the Hail Satan documentary. This film is an exploration of the popular instrumentalist Kenny G, but it is also so much more than that. This film is an exploration of music criticism. It delves into why some people love him and why some people hate him, and it's all done in such an incredibly hilarious and entertaining and informative way. This is easily one of the funniest and most thought-provoking movies of the year. This is another documentary where I feel as though it's just one of those perfect subjects to cover. Kenny G himself is interviewed in this film and is very funny with plenty of personality. There are some music critics interviewed in this film that have some hilariously well-worded, scathing critiques of him. This is a very special documentary film that will have you challenge challenging your own biases and perceptions. There's intelligent commentary on genre and music. There are great insights into aspects of the music industry. There's a healthy amount of information covered in this film that was just so surprising and interesting to learn. And I am a person that was not really familiar with Kenny G at all before watching this, so you do not need to have any knowledge of him or investment in his music to be able to enjoy this film. On top of that, it's a super clean, well-edited, and well-produced film. At no moment does it ever feel cheap, and it all looks super professional. This was a fantastic documentary that was thoroughly entertaining and hilarious, and so far it's my favorite film of 2021. So please check this one out when it gets released on December 2nd on HBO Max, and I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10. Another film I saw was the new A24 film, The Humans, directed by Stephen Karam. The film stars Richard Jenkins, Stephen Yeun, Beanie Feldstein, June Squibb, Jane Houdyshell, and Amy Schumer, and each of them worked really well for the film. This is a very uniquely toned movie. There are certainly plenty of comedic elements to this film, but the editing and presentation gives off a weirdly haunting horror movie vibe. It's a very interesting movie where it's clear that they want you to be thinking and interpreting. This is also adapted from a stage play created by the director. This film takes place in a very bizarre New York apartment, and while some of the characters are just moving in, they attempt to celebrate Thanksgiving there. This is a very well-written family drama. The characters are fleshed out and it's very enjoyable to watch them. It's well-paced, information is communicated effectively. It's also surprisingly well shot. This is another movie with a very limited environment to film in, but they really made the most of it. The interesting framing and cinematography really helped to ensure that the setting is very much a character in this film. The apartment itself has lots of personality and also adds to interpretations that audience members might come up with. There's a great sense of tension, there's fantastic atmosphere, characters are often hilariously passive-aggressive to each other, and without spoiling anything, the final shot of the film is pretty fantastic. The music in this film is used sparingly, but it's awesome when it is used. It's from composer Nico Muhly, who you might have heard composing the series finale for Wonder Chosen.
Will you turn your face away from my camera, please? Will you please? I'm asking you, I'm begging you nicely to please turn your face away from my camera.
Nico has clearly come a long way since then, and the tone and style are much more matured. Anyway, this was a pretty incredible first feature from this director, and I'm looking forward to whatever they make next. So check this one out when it's released on November 24th, apparently. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Another film I saw was the new Michel Franco film, Sundown, starring Tim Roth. The two had previously worked together on a film called Chronic, which I really loved. This is an interesting character study with great performances. Charlotte Gainsbourg is also fantastic. The overall tone and presentation is very similar to other Michel Franco films, but what makes this one feel a lot more silly is the amount of misdirection and twists. And this isn't a movie where you're gonna be spoiled by just knowing that that exists. It's not exactly predictable, and it is kind of fun seeing where they'll go next. This movie almost feels like a challenge on empathy. It forces you to ask what's justified and how it's justified, and it's interpretable enough that it's sure to provoke discussion among viewers. Again, there are some parts of this movie that feel stupid and irritating. The way that information is either presented or withheld can be really frustrating. Still, it was an interesting film, and perhaps I'll get more enjoyment out of it knowing what it is. I'll probably see it again someday, but I won't exactly be rushing to see it. So yeah, if this sounds interesting to you, then check it out, and I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. Another film I saw was Jagged. This is another HBO documentary, but this time about musician Alanis Morissette, and unfortunately this doesn't really separate itself from the crowd in the way that listening to Kenny G did. This is basically just like any other music documentary. If you're not interested in the musician, then you have no reason to be interested in the movie. It also doesn't help that Alanis herself has denounced this documentary, calling it reductive and salacious. Whoopsie. Personally, I found it to be a very okay documentary. Some parts were interesting and enjoyable, but ultimately it's just very forgettable. It doesn't really have a purpose, it doesn't really have an ending, there's no reason for it to exist. It's a very middle-of-the-road documentary that doesn't do anything particularly special, and yep, I would have forgotten about this movie completely if it wasn't in my notes for this video. So I guess don't check it out, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. Another film I saw was the new Netflix film 7 Prisoners. This is a Brazilian drama thriller about human trafficking. It's got a great plot with interesting dilemmas. It has distinguishable characters with very watchable conflicts and dynamics. The subject matter helps for this to be a very emotionally engaging film. It is definitely a tough situation for these characters, so it's not exactly a feel-good movie or anything. I love that they've taken this subject matter and created ways for there to be moral ambiguity in some of the characters' decisions. The technical presentation of this film doesn't do a whole lot to stand out. The cinematography and music are both above average, but despite not showing off in those categories, it still very much serviced the film. The writing and acting are both pretty great, and overall it is a very well-paced, watchable, and intense movie. I really enjoyed this one, and I'll definitely be seeing it again. By the time this video is posted, it will be out on Netflix already, so check it out. And I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Another movie I saw was Out of Sync. This is a Spanish film about a sound designer who starts experiencing an issue where her brain is desyncing her hearing and vision. This was a good concept to explore, and it gave plenty of opportunity to have some weird audio edits in the film. Parts of the film show her perspective, and it's always pretty interesting. The film also just looks really professional. It is well shot and pretty well acted. The lead performance of this film is really great and does not disappoint. Now, I was worried that I might get sick of this film because of the limited scope of what's possible with this concept, but they actually did a surprising amount more with it than I was expecting. Without spoiling anything, there are parts closer to the end where the logic of the film starts to get much weaker. However, I can at least give this film some credit in that sense because they do eventually address some of the criticisms that come with where they decided to take the story. On one hand, I really love this film for being so expansive with its story, but part of me still wishes they would have dialed it back just a tiny bit before the end. Regardless, despite me not loving where they took the ending, it is still an undeniably thought-provoking film, and it didn't ruin the movie. Overall, it was well presented, well acted, and surprisingly interesting. I will likely see this one again, although I don't know how soon. So yeah, if this sounds interesting to you, then check it out. It's difficult to choose between a 6 or a 7, so whatever, I'm just gonna give it a 7 out of 10. It's closer to a 6 than an 8. Another film I saw was The Worst Person in the World. This is from Norwegian director Joachim Trier. This is the third in what he considers to be a thematic trilogy, with his other films Reprise and Oslo August 31st. Now, I haven't seen Reprise, but I remember enjoying Oslo August 31st. But unfortunately, the other two narrative features that he's directed since Oslo August 31st and this newest film were both pretty bad. So I guess this could be considered kind of a return to form for some people, because honestly, this is easily my favorite film I've seen from him. The performances in this film were all great, with the lead winning Best Actress at Cannes. This is a really great character study film that follows kind of a narcissist. It is honestly a beautiful film that is emotionally complex while being very honest and real. The pacing of this film is genuinely fantastic. It presents itself as having 12 chapters, a prologue, and an epilogue. It is incredibly well structured, and the 2 hours of this film just fly by effortlessly. The prologue in this film was particularly amazing. There was just so much information delivered in such an entertaining way. It has a great usage of soundtrack and a really strong energy. It is super well shot, and the film looks great. I guess my biggest issue with this film is that it eventually does take a turn towards being a bit more tropey, and when the rest of the film really isn't, it does kind of stand out more. Still, this movie was an absolute joy to watch, and I will definitely be seeing it again. It was hilarious, it was dramatic, it was meaningful. So yeah, check this one out whenever you can, and I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. Another film I saw was Drive My Car. This is a Japanese film that won Best Screenplay at Cannes Film Festival, and it's also based off of a short story. Now, most of the films that win Screenplay at Cannes are ones that I really enjoy, so I was actually a bit disappointed by this movie. To be perfectly honest, the story was not great. There are many parts in this film that felt weirdly silly. There were a lot of moments that definitely had me squinting my eyes. What's weird about this movie is that it feels really Oscar baity, and that's not to suggest that it's actually trying to win an Oscar, but it really just gives off that vibe with how it presents itself. So much of this film feels like it would have worked better if there was a more comedic tone. There might have been some intentional comedy in the film, but the majority of it really didn't feel that way. So when some parts get weirdly goofy, they really stand out. Now, I want to be clear that this is not a bad film. It's mostly just one that I really did not connect with. There are a lot of technical elements in this film that are really impressive. There are great performances, it's decently well shot, there were some notable sound design choices sequences that I really loved. But at the end of the day, this is a 3-hour-long movie where I did not care about the characters. There were definitely some key moments in the film that I really connected with, but for the most part, I was relatively uninvested. There were definitely some satisfying elements of the plot that got revealed as the film went along. There were also some really great visuals here and there, but I found myself getting kind of impatient with this film by the end of it once it revealed what the entire experience would be. It's not really a boring film, it was just kind of underwhelming and unsatisfying to me, and despite being well made on a technical level, I really did not get the intended full experience of this film. The piece as a whole was just so meh to me. Who knows, maybe this is just a me problem and you could watch it and experience all of these sentimental emotions that you're supposed to, but as for myself, I did not retain much from this film at all. I initially rated this film a 6, but with how little I remember it, I should probably just rate it a 5. So sorry everybody, this is a 5 out of 10 for me. Don't let it stop you from checking it out, I guess. Another film I saw was Silent Night. This is a drama horror comedy from director Camille Griffin. It's also a Christmas movie. This film is well shot and presented, but what really carries it is its concept, which I can't really talk about, I guess, because it would kind of spoil it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of time at the beginning of the film where I was kind of just waiting for it to move along. Like, it's clear that there were elements that it needed to reveal about itself, and it was kind of just taking its sweet time to do it. Once the plot does get going, the tone of the movie improves dramatically. From that point on, every scene winds up having a level of humorous morbidity to it. There are a few plot holes and unanswered questions about this concept, but for the most part, it's worth the experience. There's parts of this movie that I found irritating, some of the dialogue was really ham-fisted, but it was an intriguing enough film for me to continue along with it to the end. Roman Griffin Davis from Jojo Rabbit is pretty great in this film. There's actually a pretty emotional moment that relies almost entirely on his performance, and he pulls it off really well. There's also some really good music at pivotal moments in the film, and this movie is also pretty ballsy with the consequences that it's willing to deliver on. For the most part, it refreshingly doesn't take the coward's way out from its own implications. Again, there's much of this film that is annoying or predictable, but there's also a good amount to respect about this film. I don't regret watching it, and it kept my attention throughout. So if this looks interesting to you, then check it out. And I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10. And the last movie to talk about from Toronto Film Festival 2021 is Wolf. This film describes itself as a high-concept art house drama about a boy who believes he's a wolf. And who boy was this movie terrible. It stars the guy from 1917 and Johnny Depp's daughter, and they're in a facility where they apparently just put people who have species dysphoria, so everyone there is like further gone than furries. It sounds like a fun enough concept, but this movie is just so terribly written and executed, and surprisingly enough, it takes itself way too seriously. Like, this movie actually thinks it's some serious art house drama. The two main characters wind up barking and hissing at each other and running around on all fours, and the music is insisting such an over-dramatic tone. This movie is constantly insisting that it's purposeful and profound. It's genuinely embarrassing. It doesn't even seem like they put much effort into the concept or universe either. Like, if they're trying to cure all of these people and make them believe that they're actually human, then why would you put them all together, often unsupervised? Like, they clearly don't have locks on their doors and they're just running around the kitchen every night, and half of the shit they wind up doing for their therapy just seems to be encouraging it. Like, they walk them around on fucking leashes and shit. Why are you doing that? Why does this girl get to keep her bird suit? It's so fucking unbelievably dumb and boring. I was impatient with it, and it was putting me to sleep. I didn't give a single shit about what happens to any character in the film. The main character woos at one point, and it's really fucking lame. Get a better wooer. This movie sucks, it's boring and obnoxious, it has zero self-awareness, and has no fucking idea what it is. Perhaps if they took this same concept and make a comedy, then it might have been bearable. But as it is right now, this movie is a pile of shit. Check this one out, never. And I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. And that does it for all of my TIFF 2021 coverage. If I continue doing this format where it's all in one video, then it's unlikely I'll be able to release any TIFF content on YouTube during the festival next year. So make sure to follow my Twitter account where I give shorter reviews of films as the festival is taking place. Anyway, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stuff. Bye-bye. Right there, how come I can't click on it? Am I stuck? Did I soft lock the game?